Good afternoon. We will now reconvene the open session of today's meeting at 1:03 p.m. We are rising from closed session with a report. Before we vote on that report, Deputy Mayor Huntley declared a pecuniary interest on item 5.3. So he will recuse himself for the vote with regards to the report. So that being said, the report from closed session is that council appoint Pamela Mitchell to the Business Improvement Area Board of Management and appoint Nancy Jack and Marcy High to the Cavan Monaghan Accessibility Advisory Committee for the 2022-2026 term of council. I'm going to move in a seconder for that report. Moved by Councilor Burns, second by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Thanks, everyone. Moving on, we have the minutes of the special budget meeting from December 11th, the minutes of the regular budget meeting, the regular meeting held December 15th, the minutes of the special budget meeting held January 15th, and the minutes of the special budget meeting held January 22nd. Can we get a mover and a seconder to approve those minutes as presented? Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? Those are approved. Minutes from committee and boards. We have the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee meeting minutes of September 18th and the Millbrook Valley Trails Advisory Committee meeting minutes of November 24th. So can I get a mover that the minutes of both of those two collections be approved for, just let me get the vernacular right, approved as presented? Moved by Councilor Burns, second by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. And lastly, we have the Cavan Monaghan Public Library Board minutes of November 18th. Can I get a motion to receive those for information? Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councilor Edgerton. All in favor? That is approved. Thank you. So next item, we're going to move up a letter that we received just for consideration because it asked for pertaining to the budget consideration. So I have to get support for a motion that the council support moving up item 13.1, John Follis 2026 budget comments for council's consideration as part of the budget. So if everyone's okay, we're just shifting that from 13 up to now. So we'll have that conversation about the letter now. Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. So if you could pull up the letter for me. Feel like me to speak to it, probably. Yeah, so in speaking with or from the letter that we received from Mr. Follis, he's asking about the advocacy for the well-regarded topic that came up and we talked about at this open public meeting about the amount of downloading that the province has been conducting to municipalities and the pressure that's putting on the tax base. Mr. Follis is asking that we allocate some budget monies aside to help with the advocacy that a lot of other organizations are really doing, including the County of Peterborough and the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. I don't really think there's a need for any money to do the advocacy and support the advocacy at this time. And I plan on reaching out to Mr. Follis this evening to share that. None of the agencies that are doing all this advocacy that we're a part of have asked us for a fiscal contribution to support their work. So, but I have talked to the clerk that when they do circulate letters of advocacy and support, that we highlight those and bring them on council so that we can decide to put our support behind or not as a council for the various advocacy that those groups do. But with all due respect to Mr. Follis, I don't think there's any money that's required. These groups are doing it. There's certain memberships that we may have or don't have, but they advocate for all the borough municipalities on mass. So with that, unless someone would like to come up with a certain money value to put at it, my suggestion would be that we just receive the comments for consideration and thank Mr. Follis for those as well. And Councilor Byrne, a question with regards to that.
Through the chair, not so much a question as a comment. I understand and I kind of appreciate what John's trying to get across in the letter that he's put forward. The problem I have, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many hands are in my pocket grabbing tax money. The fact that the government of Ontario is doing things that are downloading, or the federal government is doing things that at the end of the day, they're all in the same pocket. There's only so much that the taxpayer can afford to do. My big concern is not so much who's responsible for the problem, is to fix the problem as far as the waste. I think the average taxpayer would just like to see the taxpayer money spent wisely, not just divvied up so many different ways and everybody's accusing somebody else of the reason for the problem. We need to get back to some basic fundamentals financially, and that'd be my big point to this.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, I'll make the motion about receiving the letter at this point then, seeing as it's sort of my direction. So I'll make that motion. Can I get a seconder to receive the letter with thanks? Seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is received. Thank you again, Mr. Follis. Next, report Finance 2026 2026-02 final budget presentation. And we need to accept an amended report for this document because there's been some updates as of some information we received last week. Finance 2026-02 final 2026 budget presentation and attachment 10 be replaced with the updated budget presentation. So that encompasses the clerk's direction, as I'm told. So can I get a mover and a seconder to accept that amended report? Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Natchap. All in favor? That is approved. With that, we are over to you, Ms. Pope.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to all of council. This is the final budget presentation and report for your consideration. As you know, at the January 15th meeting, we had to postpone the evening meeting to January 22nd, and we had one of our council members unable to be present. So council decided to postpone any asset replacement reserve discussions and any further reductions till the meeting today to allow all members of council to be present. So I have before you the final operating and capital budget presentation. It still does include the same 4.82 that you saw at the second draft. However, today's discussion here for the asset replacement reserve, if there are any changes there, with the additional slide as well, the additional attachment number 12. If we could bring that up onto the screen as well. We just had a development charge meeting with our management team and our consultants, and we are preparing the 2026. It was a 2025 project with a rollover, and so we are working through that. And as we were having that discussion, there were two projects that we could fund through the 2026 DCs that we're working through, and therefore we're able to reduce the impact on the property tax levy. And so we've included this additional attachment number 12 that you have today. And that is basically showing that for the growth management study, the overall funding we can receive through DCs is 90%. So therefore we can take $81,144 from DCs, and we can reverse out because part of that was a rollover from last year. There was only 79,000 in the budget, so we can use the DCs towards it there and also in this 2026 budget. Also, the official plan, it's 67.5% overall DC eligible. The project cost is 190,000, but $128,250 is eligible under DCs. So we are able to remove those from the township portion and then transfer from the official plan reserve, the surplus funds, so that the total transfer would be $209,394, which in essence from this budget that you saw today at 4.82 would allow us to reduce the municipal tax increase to 3.15 with those two changes if approved by council today. And that's the end.
Thanks, Ms. Pope. Yeah, so thanks for that. There was a few emails over the weekend too with our consultant that just trying to clarify and get an understanding of exactly what, because studies such as these have been a long part of development charges because a lot of them are growth related and accommodating growth. So if growth is going to at least endeavor to pay for itself, it should be funding these required studies. So it does to a certain percentage. There has been a lot of conversation at the provincial level about removing the eligibility of studies. So that's why they've been allocated funded through taxation over previous years because of that lack of certainty about that source. But it's nice to know that at least under today's legislation as it exists, that they are eligible to this certain extent. And obviously we don't need the amount of municipal tax monies that we've already levied for these projects. So I think it only makes sense because we've levied that money, it's taxpayer funds to go to those studies, that we should be returning those to the taxpayer to reduce this year's levy. Is there questions about any of the multiple moving parts about this? Because we still have a couple other conversations about the budget, but this is, I want to get, if we're moving forward with this and council approves it, then we know we're working on a 3.15 instead of the previous, I think 3.74. So I just want to start the conversation with there and know where we're going into the conversations after the fact. But questions with regards to that, what's been proposed, and I can read the motion more accurately if you'd like at the time. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, I guess if you read the motion, it might answer my question. And it was just, this is just pertaining to simply moving the growth management study and the official plan piece into DCs funded versus levy funded. Is that the essence?
Yeah, so both of these studies have been amortized over previous years, so they're not fully in the levy this year to be funded from the tax levy. So there's been contributions of 10 or 20 or $30,000 over previous years, knowing that these studies are coming up. So as it shows in the capital budget, and you don't need to change, Mark, I can show you. In the official plan reserve, we already have $180,000, and in the growth management, we have a rollover of already 79,000. So those monies aren't going to be fully required, and they're municipal monies. So those won't be required for those studies, only the fractions that exceed what the eligibility is. So the motion is, to your point, is that council direct staff to utilize $209,394 of development charges and allocate the original funding to reduce the impact on the municipal tax levy. This funding adjustment returns $81,144 to the surplus that was previously allocated to the growth management study and transfers $128,250 to the surplus from the official plan reserve. So what the net result is, instead of reallocating all of these monies because it's been previously collected in previous years, it will be collected in the 2025 surplus, and then that will just be applied to reduce the levy. So instead of putting it on project by project by project, you add it to the surplus because it's been previously accrued, and then it will just have that net impact on the levy. Councilor Byrne, question with regards to the motion.
Through the chair to Kimberly, for my curiosity, we're talking about development charges that we've already received, or are these future ones that we expect to receive?
Thank you. These are actually future. So anything that we're about to levy, because we always review during the development charges study update what projects we've completed, what projects we haven't completed, and what projects we need to complete over that forecasted period of time. And then it's based on what we anticipate to be the growth in our community, and then the rates are set. So we're at the preliminary beginning of this process and collecting the data and working with our consultants. But yes, this would be for future projects because we can't go back and change a development charge historically. It changes from once it's passed. So then we'll start levying that development charge, and those funds will start coming in through development charges.
Just a question, but just for clarity though, with regards to the development charges and in the reserve report that we've seen, I know it's a couple years old. We do allocate and have isolated administrative studies for DC eligibility, and that is one of the accounts that we're actually not in it, or we weren't. I gotta be accurate because it's 2 years old, but we had money in that reserve because when we collect it, we can't just allocate it anywhere. You have to reserve those portions. So I think we had somewhere in the round of $80,000 in the studies reserve from the DC collection. So understanding that the GMS wasn't identified, the OP was. So for the GMS, Councillor Byrne, and that explanation is absolutely right because it wasn't identified. It will be identified and is thusly eligible. But for the OP that has been identified, that $80,000 or whatever remains in the net new amount in that reserve could be used towards the OP. So it's not a total new because the OP was identified. And so those funds that we have in the bank from the DC reserves on that account, that one says 64, in or around there because it's so old. So that money could be directed to the OP. So it's not a total net borrow because the studies are studies and they can be funded from that. So yeah, if you want to clarify that, Ms. Pope, I just want to make sure I'm right. And then I'll go back to Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mayor. You're absolutely right. And just to clarify on that, as we collect through the past DC charges, they go into the reserve and they're only spent where they're allocated for. So when you come to the new study and you're looking at it, that's where I was saying if a past project has not been completed, so like the OP, those funds still remain there and they offset the future cost as well. So if you have a project completely finished and not carried forward, it would be gone. Any new project would be added. Any project in between when we're working on a study, of course, there would be the carry forward if we haven't spent those funds.
Thanks for that clarity. Back to you, Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, back to Kimberly then. So for my understanding then, moving forward, if the development charges didn't come through, or the Ontario or the federal government or both decide that the way development charges are going to be allowed to be applied changes, do we carry on doing these studies or do we wait till the money comes in to start the study? How does that overlap? If the money's never come in from the development charges as planned, what's the outcome?
Ms. Pope?
So historically, what we have done is whenever there's been a change in legislation, there's usually been a timeline. So there's time for you to go back to the table and look at it. When legislation has not been passed, we don't preempt those decisions in the current. However, our consultants are very much aware and they're watching that. They're actually part of a number of the committees that are working on this for the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. So we don't have a crystal ball to read into the future, but what I can say is we're aware of it, we're watching for it, and we will adjust if those, whatever those conditions are, come back to us. We will have to sit back with our development charges and readjust. In the same way, when we have our growth in our community, if it's over or underestimated, we always have to, in the next study, pick that up on the other end. So if it hasn't come on as quickly or it came on more then we would have more funds there and then obviously reduce the impact on the next study. So it's always a moving machine that we adapt. I don't have a crystal ball for the future, but we're not sticking our head in the sand either and not being aware of what's coming. We're just not making unknown decisions about unknown decisions that are coming at us yet.
And just on that same subject, it's my understanding, or at least in the historical, I think it's been 4 or 5 DC changes since I've been involved in municipal politics. Traditionally, what they've been based on is that term of your study will expire. And then that change will come into pass. So if it's reflected in this year's study and the legislation doesn't come before that's adopted by council, because it's set in stone, it's set in the sand, it's already been established. So not to say that the province can do whatever it can do always, but traditionally, it allows, you have to come into conformity once your 5-year period will expire. That was the case with certain other previous legislation when it changed, when things were moved because they were in your study that was adopted by council and approved and endorsed by council and consistent with all the legislation. You're allowed to run through that 5-year period as is with what's identified, and then you'd have to become adjusted as after the fact. But it's a big, I don't think there's no way they could cancel them altogether, but how they will probably defer payments and certain things and nuances, we'll certainly wait and see. Are there questions with regards to this first motion with regards to the budget? Seeing none. Okay, so I'll read that motion just again, just for clarity, that council directs staff to utilize 209,000 of development charges and allocate the original funding to reduce the impact on the municipal tax levy. This funding adjustment returns $81,144 to the surplus that was previously allocated to the growth management study and transfers $128,250 to the surplus from the OP reserve. And move in a seconder for that motion. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Natshaw. All in favor? That is approved. Excellent. Thank you. So now that we have that part of the budget behind us, Ms. Pope, do you have more to add, or we're going to just go right to the consideration? Okay. So one of the conversation that we reserved to have, because unfortunately, and it was partially my mistake, partially the weather's mistake, Councillor Natshaw, that we rescheduled, but we have yet to talk about the asset replacement reserve utilization. So as of right now, just so we're all on the same page with everything that's factored in, with the motion that was just passed by council, we are sitting at a 3.15 total tax levy. And that is funding the asset replacement reserve at 100%, understanding that that's not 100% from the levy this year because we're using some of the revenues we received from the sales of property to the tune of 343,000. But it does result in a total contribution to the asset replacement reserve of $3.275 million plus 155. So as we discussed, the only thing different about this slide, the numbers, the values are the same. It's just the levy number that we're reducing down from is no longer 4.82. It is now 3.13. So all of the numbers, it's fairly simple. For a 1% reduction would be $124,000 reduction from the 3.2 million. And a 0.5% reduction would be a $62,000. So you can do that math as you will. It kind of follows, but it's not exactly updated with regards to that recent motion. So any questions with regards to the asset replacement reserve and the utilization of those funds and this year's levy? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to the chair. So where are we at? Are we still discussing not funding 100% of the asset management fund? Or are you under the impression that at 3% or just roughly over, that's a reasonable ask for the increase?
I have a motion that I'd be open to floating. I just was waiting to hear council's discussion with regards to the topic, but I can make that motion if there's no questions or comments. So my proposal is, as much as I would really love to have achieved the fiscal goal, and I know probably Ms. Pope would as well, of being the first time this municipality has ever put away 100% of the depreciation of the previous year. I just know that I think we're in early days of what's going to be a few years of significant hardship. And, you know, we're already in the realm of putting away, I think it's close to 600,000. It's more than 500,000 more than we did in the previous year, being 2.7 million. So I think for the nominal miss of missing by 62,000, I think I propose to reduce the levy to 2.65 by utilizing 0.5% tax levy reduction and making the asset replacement reserve closer to the 98.1%. I really wanted to get that, figure out a way to make the 100% feasible, but I just think that we have a unique opportunity to still be contributing the most significant amount of money towards the asset replacement reserve that any council has ever done this year. And I've had to sell myself on that because I really, really would like to fund at 100%, but to miss by 62,000, I think is a viable and a worthwhile thing to do, considering the economic hardships and the unknowns that we're walking into with the, you know, international disruption. So that motion would be to the effect, and I know I have to be a bit more generic because we have to give us the stake, but to reduce the asset replacement reserve to achieve a 2.65% tax levy on 2026 budget. So I think that's more friendly information rather than all my numbers that I know, Ms. Pope, there's rounding and things that we're often slightly off on. So that was the motion I was prepared to make today, but open to questions and discussion with regards to the motion. Yeah, I'll make that motion and speak to the motion, Councillor Byrne. If it's about the motion, yes, but if it's not about the motion, then no, we kind of got to deal with the motion because it's on the table. Yeah. So it is second the motion. Okay, so now the motion's legit. So now you can speak to the motion, try the best you can to speak to the motion, Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair to the people that live here in the township. At the end of the day, we've had the fortunate fact that we've made some money selling, and I mentioned before, one time only sales. We've had this advantage of maybe using DC charges that might arrive at some point in time. But the initial ask of the taxpayer to foot the new budget has been offset by those little things, and they're one-offs. We're still quite an increase in the cost of running the township. I'm not bent on this idea of having to have 100% replacement to the asset management fund. I know it sounds good. I know there's lots of nice feelings about it. But at the end of the day, I still come back to the fact that the actual budget is fairly pricey, and we've just been able to downsize it so it looks more attractive by one-off things. We haven't really tackled the fact that the budget seems to be growing way more than the population or the size of this township. So I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, I don't really agree with that comment, but I can understand where it's coming from. I mean, the budget pressures are the budget pressures, and it's up to us to make them. And like I said, we've had multiple meetings, more than normal, about this, and I haven't heard a lot of suggestions to reduce the budget. It's council's job to come up with ways to reduce that budget. And we haven't had a lot of those suggestions. Case in point, we just had the floor and I made the motion because we hadn't had suggestions from council. That's our job. So if we're not cutting specific things, if there's not an appetite, when myself and the members of the finance committee started, we were at about 11%, just under. So we've been cutting a lot, and we've been trying to figure out ways to continue to provide the services and the road structures and everything that the municipality needs. Council endorsed and supported the moving up of the escalating of the works to a 5-year horizon for the water main breaks, because that's not a sustainable reality. We have 60-year-old infrastructure that's failing twice in 24 hours, and we have significant works that need to be done. Council's approved that. There's a cost associated with doing that. We chose that. That's our choice. So that's in the budget, whether we like it or not. So we have tried, I think it had the opportunity, at least every one of us, to propose cuts to the capital budget to reduce the levy, but we haven't had a lot of directions or a lot of suggestions in that regard. So we continue to move forward. So seeing as we've been over this for now, this will be the 4th discussion, and plus the informal meetings we've had with councils, with the finance committee, this is sort of where we've come to. But this is council's decision. This is it. I think it's a balanced approach. With regards to the one-time funding comment, we buy and sell properties all the time. And I think all of this council is aware there's a number of other sales and acquisitions that are under discussion at different levels, but these are only the ones that have been approved And by my estimation, I think it only equates to about 10 to 15% of the total potential revenue that has potential to come into the municipality. But again, especially with the commercial properties, markets are all over the place. No one knows what you're going to get if you're selling, and you might choose not to. But utilizing, like I said, about 15 to 20, at the most 20% of what you're expected to bring in from sales, that's a decision you get to make as a council. That's it. If you wanted to not utilize those monies to reduce the levy would be 3% higher. So we can make the levy 3% higher if we don't want to use that money. That's council's decision. That's what we're here to do. But without suggestions, the capital budget is the capital budget and we move forward. So the motion is on the floor. Any other questions with regards to the motion? Councillor Natchoff.
Thank you through you, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to Kimberly and that Matthew as well, the staff for all of the work that they put in to get us to where we are today. I can definitely understand the sentiments of Councillor Byrne and the costs associated with running the township. I think that coming in at the 2.65% is definitely a reasonable increase given the costs of what it takes to sustain what we need to do here in the township. Trying to attain a 100% ARR is completely commendable. And once again, an excellent job just increasing it every year that I've been sitting on council. I think that, to once again echo the sentiments of Councillor Byrne, paying things today and sticking the, future generations with larger bills is not something we want to do. So it's a delicate balance to try to strike what I think is best for everyone. So I definitely support the decisions that you guys have made. Matthew, I want to thank you for always making yourself available to discuss this, both here with the community and privately with me, and your recommendations that you've come forward. So I'm in favor of supporting this. It was more a comment than anything else.
Okay, well, the motion's been seconded. If there's no more questions about the motion, I'll call a recorded vote. Ms. Page.
Deputy Mayor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Edgerton, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Natchoff.
Yeah.
Mayor Graham.
Yes. That is approved. Thanks, everyone. Good discussion. And thanks for the public for participating in the meeting and Mr. Falls for sending his letter. And John, I will call you this afternoon. I promise you that. Next report is 10.2, Planning and Building. Mr. Phillips is with us today. Mr. Phillips, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. To you and the rest of the council, the report before you is the development statistics for the fourth quarter of 2025, as well as the year-end totals. And the recommendation is that council receive Building Department Report 2026-01 Development Statistics, fourth quarter 2025 for information. Just a couple of things to note in this report. The numbers did come in looking pretty good. We came in above estimate in the Q4. The main reason for that being that the school building permit came in. It's not, just to be clear, it's not 100% issue because we still are going through site plan, but all the building department review work is done and it's ready to be issued. So we thought we'd reflect it in here as it's a more accurate depiction of the building department's work in Q4. We also had 11 permits for new houses in Tower Hill North that may not go forward until the spring, but they were reviewed back in Q4 of 2025. That being said, any questions? I'm available.
Thanks, Mr. Phillips. Questions with regards to the report? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to Kyle, is the school property officially changed ownership into the Pine Ridge School Board? And I also, we talked earlier, I just wondered if you came up with that number for how many severances that actually happened in the 2025s.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. The ownership change has not hit us, so we have not seen that that's happened, transpired yet. I don't believe so. And the severance portion, I'd have to go back, but I will make a note of that for our next reports to see how we can more accurately depict that.
Thanks, Mr. Phillips. Deputy Mayor Hunt.
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Phillips. Great report, Kyle. Appreciate it again. My only question on that one is the value of the construction. So despite the fact that there seems to be a lot more construction, the value is significantly less. Is that because of the school, or I don't know? What's the explanation behind that one, if you don't mind?
Through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Huntley. Construction value, it's hard for me to decide whether to actually include in here because the numbers reported on building permit applications, we don't verify that. That's why we've moved away from any permit fees that are based on cost of construction. We can't really call anybody a liar or say, hey, your numbers are wrong when they put it on an application. It's not our role and we actually can't say anything. So just even on one house, a person could come in. Back when I first started here, we had issues with it all the time because we had more permits fees that were based on that cost. People would come in with an $80,000 cost for a new single family dwelling, which I don't know where they think that they're winning with impact or something. They're not. They don't use those numbers. Or another person might think that their house is going to be this multi-million-dollar house, so that number would be huge. They're all over the place. School definitely does factor into there too because it's a different square foot value. But I would say if you go back over the years, these numbers go up and down all over and they don't stay consistent with what we're actually issuing. So I wouldn't put much faith in that. I'll still report it just because it's in there, but it's not very valuable.
Thanks, Kyle. Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, back to Kyle, you just made me think of something kind of. So if a person did a renovation on their own property with their own money and they could show the receipts for what it cost, MPAC could just assess whatever value they think the increase was worth, and it doesn't mean anything either, right?
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne. That's correct. Yeah. So this is what we struggle with all the time is when the only building permit fee, again, we try to relate it back just to our fees because we want them to be accurate for how much time we have invested in it. People will come in and those numbers will be really high. MPAC, yeah, does their own thing. We also try to go, if we get a number that's astronomical and on our renovations, it is based on cost of construction, we'll try to work with them to say, hey, this number is coming in at X permit value. This isn't what it's going to cost us to carry out our inspections and review. Your number seems inflated and we're wondering why. So we usually work with the people to try to get that number to be more accurate to what we think it should be.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Kyle. Seeing no other questions, we're just receiving the Building Department Report 2026-01 for information. Moved by Councilor Byrne, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Next item is the Building and Planning 2026 Administrative Monetary Penalty and Hearing Screening Officer Bylaw Report. Again, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. This one is a little bit more complex. Staff has been working on this for over a year now, I believe. Administrative monetary penalty. So unfortunately, it does have the same acronym AMPS as our asset management, but don't get them confused. This is more of a bylaw enforcement mechanism. Previously, we've been looking at that. We did the countywide. There's been a few municipalities that jumped into this a while ago, just because they had some staff that came from other municipalities where this was utilized. But big change in the Municipal Act allowed for this to make the enforcement, the end goal enforcement mechanism more efficient. So through POA, the court system has been so backed up, especially through COVID, that we don't typically go to the provincial offenses court anymore. And most of our bylaws, we carry out through all staff, over 15 bylaws with different enforcement mechanisms. We used to take these when we would usually we use mediation and education for all our bylaw enforcement. If we got to the point where that wasn't working and we had to take it a step further, we would have to go to the provincial offenses court if we have set fines or if we're looking for a fine. That process is extremely inefficient, especially these days. You have to, just one example of mine, last year I did try to take one. You're going down to the city to see the JP to get a fine approved. That JP might not like your wording. You come back, have to redo all your forms, go see them again. Still, if they don't like the wording, you're going back there again. All this is for in the neighborhood of, in some fines, $150 that now you're going to attend court, possibly with legal, and that may get reduced to even less, something like $75. The amount of time you have in enforcing that is a huge loss. It's not efficient at all. When we talk waste, there's large waste right there. This process with this new AMP program brings that mechanism in-house in the municipality. So the way that would work, and we wouldn't change our approach in any of our bylaws. We use mediation, we use education first. That fixes 95% of our bylaw infractions, be it property standards, parking, noise, zoning, there's all sorts, and they all have different mechanisms. If we get to the point of enforcement, how this would now work is if we were to issue a fine, those fines no longer need to go up to the province to be approved. Council approves those set fines. So it's fully within your mandate to set what those fines are. And they're not supposed to be astronomical that we're making money off this. They're supposed to get the people's attention to say, hey, we're going to start laying a charge here if this doesn't correct itself. Council sets that. We do our bylaw enforcement as usual. If we get to the point, if you look at parking, where we now have fines, we're going to lay a fine, as opposed to right now, we would tow. Towing is about $500 right now, and the people don't know where their car's gone that day. Takes a whole day out. Usually with the parking, we issue 2 warning tags, so the people we know have been informed, but they, by choice, still choose to park on the road. It's still a fairly extreme measure to get the point across in a lot of cases. A fine would be much more appropriate. So it reduces that on the taxpayers of that burden. It's an easier process for us because we get a lot of phone calls once we tow, a lot of people looking for their vehicle. That's just one bylaw. So there's a lot of bylaws that can come under this as a designated bylaw. How you set those fines and everything is for later. Once that fine is applied, they have the right to appeal. That appeal is now in-house. They don't have to attend POA, and that's a big burden for them to get to that courthouse. And it's a lot, I would say, less scary for them. They're coming in, they're talking to the screening officer, which would be our first person that you appeal to. That would be set in-house as a staff person. They would look at bylaw or whoever carried out the fine. They would look at their file, see what led them to the point, make sure that we did our due diligence to educate first, see if the person appealing has a reason for what they did. And then the screening officer would now have the chance to reduce the fine, cancel the fine, or uphold it. So that all happens in-house with this system. The next step of that is we would have to retain a hearing officer, which is a whole other legal mechanism. That would be a third party that if they didn't like the screening officer's decision, they go to the hearing officer, and that whatever the hearing officer decides is final. So that takes the whole provincial court system out. That can take months and months to even get in there. So it's a win on our side. It's a win on the taxpayer side. Again, we won't be changing any of our enforcement measures. It's still mediation, education every time because we're still a small town. It still works well in most regard. But this is a really efficient way of getting to that next step. So it's only for information for you today so that you can have time to ask the questions, digest it, review it on your own. We'll bring it back at another meeting if that's where council wants to go. But I believe this is a really good, efficient way of getting the end goal enforcement measures of our bylaw on the right track.
Thanks for that report, Mr. Phillips, and for explaining it. It sounds complicated, but I think you did a good job of distilling it down. So 2 questions that I have out of the gate is, seeing as there are already, and I think that I know there's other county municipalities that are looking into, you know, this transition for all of the efficiency reasons that you mentioned. Is that, so with regards to the screening officer and the hearing individual, whatever term they have for that person, is that, you know, with those individuals being identified, the intention isn't to hire a new person to just do this, because it's not like it happens on a weekly, monthly basis. It's more intermittent. I'm sure in some of those other municipalities, there's a lot of lake-related infractions and cottage-related infractions that would probably be a catalyst for them trying to expedite the efficiencies in their regards. Is those 2 positions that would be involved? I'm assuming one would be sort of an add-on position for an existing staff person. But when it comes to that second tier, is the intention potentially to share resources across municipalities for those roles with maybe individuals? Because it would make sense to me to have an individual, maybe not from the township, to be one, or at least the second position of the hearing officer, make a final decision. It would make sense for that person to have a bit of a separation rather than just simply, representing the entity that's imposing the infraction, right? So maybe can you provide any clarity on that regard?
To you, Mayor. Yeah, good questions. Number one, so it would be an existing staff person. We would be looking to hire anybody. The key thing that's came out of this in talking to all the other municipalities that have already put this in place is our first thought was, holy, we're going to have a lot of people coming in with appeals that somebody at the front desk is going to have to deal with irate people on this. The appeals are very, very minimal. In some municipalities, they haven't had any even reach the screening officer. And that really comes down to what we already do for mediation and education. You're not laying a fine unless you absolutely have to. And you've got, it's buttoned up. You have pictures of what the issue is. It's open and shut. So that's pretty limited. So the burden on an existing staff person is not going to be great. It could be different in our municipality. Time would tell, but we don't foresee that being an issue. Second thing on the hearing officers. So the hearing officer is just a retained legal body. So pretty much all the local municipalities that are in it use the same one. I think they're out of Hamilton, but they would just be on retainer. You only pay them if it ever gets to that point. And at that time when we had the committee, nobody even reached that point. So they had this hearing officer retained, but never even utilized them. So the bigger municipalities, obviously, they have some that get there, but even those numbers are still really low.
No, that's great that it's a pay per service instead of, so you're not just paying for nothing, right? That makes a lot more sense in that regard. Okay, sorry. Questions, Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Phillips. I think you answered my question along the way, which was the cost of actually going to the POA. And I think you'd said we just don't even, we have never been there, so we don't have a cost for that. Is that kind of what I interpreted out of there?
Through you, Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor. There's a lot of cost to get there, and it really depends on what you're enforcing. The ones that I would take there would be property standards. Under there, you have the ability to come in and clean up a property, but a lot of times that's not as easy as it sounds. People usually don't want you on the property, so there's issues there. So a lot of times, not a lot of times, but it's another mechanism to look at a fine. So the last one I took was a property standards, and I think it was $150 we were going at, like it was very minimal. Those funds, we don't recoup. We recoup a small portion when it comes to when it goes through that provincial mechanism. So there's a victim surcharge. There's a whole bunch of things that goes into a fund that all municipalities share. You end up getting somewhere in the ballpark of 7 to 8% of your fine. So even if it's $75 and worst case, you've brought legal to that, you've lost a lot of money. Whereas this one, the money stays 100% in-house of any fines that are collected.
Thanks, Kyle. Questions, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, back to Kyle, I have a lot of reservations about this whole concept. I'm not stupid enough to think the court systems here in this province work properly, and they're getting terribly worse. I get that. This sounds like a good intention, and it comes with the same narrative that it's supposed to be more efficient, more this, more that. But even in your own documentation, you're always already mentioning the fact that it might expand or is likely to expand. I've never seen a lawyer that stays on retainer without cash. I don't know where that cost gets tucked in. But the big problem for me is when you talk about how this new mechanism in a perfect world will somehow enhance the accompanying the bylaws with actual proper etiquette or following the rules, basically, right? I don't see how this changes that at all. The process that you use now, if there's a problem in the township, you go out first, as far as I know, and try to discuss all these issues. I don't see how this mechanism changes any of that. If the person's blatantly not going to do it, he's blatantly not going to do it either way. I'm having trouble with that. And at the end of the day, taking the court process out and giving that authority in-house to staff, it scares me. I sat in this chambers in the last 2 years where we had a person in court over something that when he came to council, it had to be changed because there wasn't a process even there to consider the fact that he'd done something wrong. So I'm worried about taking that authority and giving it to staff. I'm worried that it's going to expand. I'm worried really, and I know you mentioned it's not, but this becoming a revenue stream. that now we just keep upping the fines. Every time I turn around, you know, for safety, Jerry, we're gonna raise the fine on this traffic thing. But it becomes a revenue stream. It's really not changing the outcome of violations or anything else. It's just becoming more profitable, and that bothers me. So could you speak to the fact how this mechanism here would have any outcome on the number of people that are compliant? That doesn't make sense to me.
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, fair comments. The idea there being that if it's a broken process to get a fine in the POA, we're going to be hesitant to waste township dollars sitting in a provincial offenses court trying to get a fine for somebody who's really not following the rules. And there's all sorts of people, you're right, with bylaw, you never know why they're doing what they're doing. Almost each one is unique. But the point is, it's easier if we really need to go that extra 5%, whereas, like I said, 95% of them we can solve on our own. It's much easier. So we're more willing to take that next step. So we know we're not wasting tax dollars trying to enforce this. We have an easier mechanism to do that final enforcement. As far as the expanding, I think, question that you had, what that was is we can put as many of our bylaws in here. They all have different mechanisms to enforce them in the end, but if they're the type that have a fine associated with them, we can put them all in there. We can identify them all as designated bylaws to have through this process, or we could have one. So it just depends. We could have parking in there and that's it. For a year, we could have a pilot program, see how that works. Again, council has full control over this program. So at any point, if you're hearing from the public that it's not working, that this isn't working, we can rescind, you have total power to rescind this bylaw. So at any point, if it lost control, which I don't believe it will, because it's such a small portion of what we're trying to do just a bit more efficiently, you have total control not to continue with it. So if we, to that point, we could start with parking, we could add in noise, we could add in site plan, we could add in as many as we want if it was working well and we wanted to continue with it. So that's the expansion part. It's just adding in other bylaws if it's working.
Thanks, Kyle. That's a good explanation. Councillor Hitchens, did you have a comment?
You, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Phillips, are you doing all bylaws or just some that you specified in this year report here? Because I think the fire collects on highway bylaws for stuff out there. Are you gonna do that too, or are they still gonna look after their own stuff?
Through you, Mayor, Councillor Edgerton. That's open for discussion. So we put, as just so you can see it, to see how it roll out, we put 3 bylaws in here. We put parking, which is our number 1 that we'd like to see in there. We put the woodland management, which is coming later, just to show that the new ones can come in there. We also put in the refuse and debris and snow, because it's something that we've been dealing with recently. We could put as many as we want in there, but at this time, I haven't really said here, because it's up to council what they want to see, and I didn't know where the discussion might go. But we could work with the fire chief to put his bylaws in there if he wants to utilize this program, or we could leave them separate. Most of these bylaws too can come under here and can still have the opportunity to, because there's certain bylaws, such as the zoning bylaw, which is more of a superior court. If we get to the point that we cannot get proper cooperation on a certain property, usually zoning goes to Superior Court. So you can still utilize other legislation to get what you need, but for most of the smaller stuff, it's going to end up under here.
Yeah, to Kyle's point is that we're just receiving this for information. There's no prescription. This is just sort of giving an update of what other municipalities have done before us and where we think there's opportunities for application and efficiencies, like you say, Kyle. So I appreciate that. Councillor Nacho.
Through you, Chair. Like theoretically, this sounds great. You know, sounds like it could add efficiency to what's going on. My only concern, and you did address it in the fact that it's very rare that it would go to the point where we would be hiring the person for the hearing end of things. Is the potential there, an opportunity there to switch the cost for legal to be put on the person that's you're taking to that next step so that it's not a punitive cost to the taxpayer? Or is that mandated through the government that, you know, we incur all the costs that are associated with this? Because ultimately, like, you know, running after a $300 fine when it's going to cost us $3,000 in legal fees, it would be a deterrent for me to be even pursue that at that end of things.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Natchoff. You have the ability to put other charges in there. So Schedule A has late payment fees, adjournment fees, adjudication fees. So some of those fees are collected in there. Again, this bylaw is not meant to be overly punitive, so it's supposed to be things that are just helping you get compliance. So the amount of stuff you want to put in there for extra cost is relatively up to you. Our costs they're fairly low, what those hearing officers are, because it's only for that time for the appeal to review the file. These aren't real complicated, like Superior Court applications. They're one-offs, property standards typically, parking, that type of stuff. So they're not a big, heavy burden on a lawyer to review these. So they're not a big cost that they carry, but you can put those extra fees, administrative fees, in that schedule.
Follow up, Councillor Natchoff?
Thank you, through you, Chair. As well, is there any mechanism that could be put into place that would look at recidivism in these circumstances? Because I'm sure you're probably having issues with people that are, you know, you may be seeing the same person that's just completely has no lawful respect for the bylaws themselves or what the job is that you have to do. So if there's something in place, or if not, could something be put in place?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Natchoff. Of course, yep. It's the same as our fees that we do now through the province. You can have second offense, third offense. You can keep going with that. I kept this pretty brief and simple. I like simple. So having recurring things, usually if you have one off, a lot of them in the legislation, it's a recurrent offense if it's a subsequent day. So there's different ones like that how often does that offense take place? If it's still an offense tomorrow, is that further money? Again, these are things that we don't usually get to in the grand scheme of things. It's very low percentage anyhow. So for the one-offs where we are going to use these, they're usually a one-time occurrence, or we're going to go to something more.
Yeah, and so Kyle, just with regards to the ones that you've identified, you identified a few. It would make sense to me that, you know, maybe you talk to in your heads of council, maybe for the next, you know, whenever the report comes forward in the end. I mean, it makes sense to start small. I mean, I think there's not many people, I think most of us, depending on where you've lived or how you've lived, have had their car towed at one point or been a part of a party with a car towed. I think there's not many people that wouldn't rather pay a fine than go find their vehicle somewhere, wherever it may be. And you know, the more rural you are, the further away it can theoretically be and the harder it can be to get to. So that's a big encumbrance. So starting with that component makes a lot of sense to me, and is certainly a lot more punitive than the alternative as it is now. So that makes some sense, but I agree, it makes sense to start small and see and learn as you kind of go. And figure out how it can work. And if, like I said, as Nelson, Councillor Edgerton said, if there's a couple maybe fire offenses that make some sense to add in there. I know I've had a few conversations with issues that the chief has had on his plate over the last few years, but it hasn't been that many. But I know that they, you know, when they come up, they can be pretty complicated and pretty, you know, pretty delicate to manage. So if it can, you know, make it a bit more streamlined and a little more effective, then I'm all for it. But I think it does make sense to sort of start small. So I'm assuming that would be a part of a future report to sort of say, this is what we feel would be sort of how we would start with it to sort of learn. And then, you know, that is something future councils can either claw back or add to moving forward. That would make some sense to me as well. Questions, Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair, I appreciate that the agenda says we're just going to recommend this be accepted. But I think some of this dialogue is necessary today and good today. So the people that are watching and the people that will watch because they hear what's going on will have some concept of what's going on before another report comes back. Like maybe we could fit the report to address some of the concerns. The one big thing that steps out and hits me in the face is this looks like if this proceeds the way it's supposed to go, at the end of the day, the one that's not compliant, the one that does not pay, whatever, it's going to go against their property taxes. And I can see that being a problem for anybody that has to renew a mortgage. If you, I guess, put a lien on a piece of property because they're not in compliance and they didn't fit all the different appeals or whatever. Now you've really impacted people directly. That scares the hell out of me, really. The other thing I was gonna ask you, because we've talked about it a bunch, am I fair to guess that most of the parking issues, which are the biggest problem that you're talking about, happen just in the village area?
Through you, Mayor, to Council Byrne, question one, actually, I'll go to question two. It depends. So we have, depends on the time of year. We've had them all over, really. Downtown has been an issue for a long time. In the high density areas, Brookside has been an issue. The new subdivision's been an issue. So it comes and goes. It ebbs and flows where the parking is an issue. In the winter, snow piling can be an issue. So I wouldn't say it's just right downtown, but the bulk of it is in Millbrook for sure. We've had it elsewhere as well. We've had to tow elsewhere through, but definitely the bulk of it's here. Sorry, could you repeat the first question? Oh, tax, yeah, that's what it was. So we do that now. So that's already in place. So on a property standards, we've had to utilize in the past. If we don't get compliance in the bylaw now, we can come in and have that property cleaned up. Again, we work with people sometimes too long, but to get them to get into compliance themselves, because going on other people's property to do things it's not good for anybody. A lot of the companies you try to get to come in there, it's not good. There's security issues. There's people's own property rights of invading their space. Entering a dwelling has a whole other legal ramification there. So that's something we try to stay away from, but sometimes we have to do it. So that's already in bylaws right now where under the building code as well, when we have different court cases, some of those can go on the property tax roll. So that isn't a big change. Most of these are going to be, again, we're going to start simple. We're going to be smaller. They're not going to end up there, or there'll be a small $20 fee or something that might end up there that needs to get paid out, property change of ownership. But right now with your property standards, those numbers can get really high and they can be on the tax roll. Unfortunately, there's no other mechanism really that's much better than it. Again, mediation, education is the best, and we resolve most of them by that.
Yeah, good explanation, Kyle. Thanks for that. Okay, we're just receiving this report for information, but we can expect to see it back sometime soon after staff have done a bit more due diligence and maybe listen to some of the commentary, and we'll look forward to that. So moving to secondary receive for information, moved by Councilor Nash, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Next, we have Matt Wilkinson and Karen Ellis here for the Building and Planning Draft Woodland Management Bylaw.
Thank you. Through the chair to members of council, staff, and public, today's township staff are presenting planning report number 2026-03. The report outlines the background and the parameters of a draft woodland management bylaw for information. As drafted, the woodland management bylaw is a tool for staff to enforce the guidelines that are already in place, found in our official plan and our strategic plan and existing tree cutting policies. The bylaw is aimed at protecting our significant woodlands and regulating clear cutting ahead of approvals. The bylaw does not regulate the cutting of single trees. Over the past 15 years, Cav staff and council have discussed different ways to protect trees and woodlands across the township, always seeking for a balance. In that time, standalone and official plan policies have been approved by council to promote and guide development in and around these natural areas. However, the township does not regulate the cutting of trees and has little to no recourse if trees have been removed ahead of approvals. The goals of the bylaw are to follow council's direction, enact the objectives of the township's strategic plan, support official plan policies, enhance local reforestation, govern tree cutting in sensitive natural areas, and regulate clear cutting ahead of approvals. The woodland bylaw is not drafted to penalize everyday normal use and does not regulate the cutting of single trees. The draft bylaw only applies to clusters of 5 or more healthy, non-native trees that have a minimum diameter of 15 centimeters, or approximately 6 inches, and that are in a sensitive natural area, and seeks to regulate the clear cutting of areas being over half an acre in size. A sensitive natural area are areas that are mapped as provincially significant woodlands or provincially significant wetlands, or within the township natural heritage system as mapped on Schedule B of our official plan. The bylaw also protects trees that have been identified and designated by council as community trees. The currently township does not have any community trees. And of these identified trees, there is still approximately 30 exemptions listed in section 4 of the bylaw. including trees that are dead, diseased, hazardous, on the invasive species list, part of normal farm practices, part of a forest management plan, for normal firewood use, part of an approved building permit, or one of 9 listed situations in the Municipal Act. Meaning that cutting a single tree in your front lawn does not need a permit. Cutting a cluster of buckthorn in your driveway does not need a permit. Cutting back the tree line that's encroaching on an agricultural field would not need a permit. Numerous other jurisdictions have some kind of tree cutting bylaw. While yes, we see them in more built-up areas, some of those areas have very high penalties and are still exploring more ways to regulate with stiffer penalties. As development pressures continue to increase, staff are of the opinion it would be best to start a regulation that is relatively low and looks to educate and provide options rather than pushing it off and then needing to hand out more court orders to protect the few remaining natural areas, especially for those groups who are trying to clear cut ahead of development approvals. Clear cutting can be permitted, but as drafted, the bylaw would require applications would need the support of council prior to staff issuing a woodland bylaw permit. There is no cost to a landowner for a woodland management permit. However, if someone does want to cut a cluster of qualified trees for a reason that is not exempted, they may need the support of an environmental impact study, a tree preservation plan, or simply replanting the trees that they cut down. As drafted, the bylaw works by both being proactive and reactive. Township building and planning staff currently review every building permit and planning act application for conformity with official plan and zoning regulations before being issued. This woodland management bylaw would provide clarity for staff and public when working around natural areas. Any proposed tree cutting would be assessed at that time, and options would be discussed with the landowner. Building permits may be issued when the protection of tree has been taken into consideration. Typically, this is demonstrated with a tree preservation or a protection plan, simply by drawing on your site plan, these are the trees I'm going to not cut down. Bylaw would also work by being complaint-based. A bylaw officer would investigate when a complaint of a tree cutting is being received. Again, the bylaw, it only applies to clusters of 5 or more healthy, non-invasive trees with a minimum diameter of 15 centimeters or 6 inches in a sensitive natural area and are not under the listed exempted uses. If a qualifying cluster of trees are damaged or destroyed without a permit, bylaw staff will investigate similar to any other bylaw that they investigate. Bylaw staff will work with that property owner to try to gain compliance. However, where an officer believes that contravention of the bylaw has occurred and a resolution cannot be reached, the officer may issue an order requiring rehabilitation to the satisfaction of the township. This work may be required would require the completion of additional studies and rehabilitation of the area, and a fine is always the last step. Only after all these options have been exhausted would a person who has not complied with an order to rehabilitate or replant may be given a penalty notice, as we've seen in the app discussion we just had. Right now, that penalty notice is sitting at $300 per infraction. Those penalty notices can be appealed. When a clear cutting has occurred, the total amount of the special fines can be calculated as not less than $50 and not more than $1,000 per injured tree or destroyed in excess of 50 trees. Again, this is still on the lower end of the jurisdictional scale of areas. As drafted, the woodland management would enact the objectives of the strategic plan, the official plan, protect tree cutting in natural sensitive areas, and regulate tree cutting, and not impede typical rural and agricultural land uses. The report before you recommends that council receive this draft bylaw for information and direct staff to hold a public open house to receive comments from the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. A lot to talk about and a lot to digest in there. So again, we're only looking forward for the next step would be that PIC public information session to discuss it. So that's good to know. I guess the initial comment that I have is my concern is understanding that this only applies to those protected areas. Well, especially when you included wetland, we have and run into issues with the designation of a provincially significant wetland all the time. With regards to, is it a wetland at all? Is there any water there at all? So, I think the concern I have fundamentally or foundationally is it basis on the mapping that we have lots of problems with and don't really have any autonomy even when it comes to things like official plans, to try to pick a more accurate one or be more specific when it comes to whether it's agricultural mapping or otherwise. So how are we going to rein in the over application of those potentially environmentally sensitive areas? I'm glad you mentioned all the agricultural exemptions and the understanding of that, because obviously that, that's a much different circumstance. But can you maybe speak to some of the environmental areas? And I'm assuming for that public information session or whatever the right verbiage is called, that there would be township maps available to understand like where these areas are. Because there's a lot of them. Some of them are very small, some of them are very big, but I think it's important to visualize how many of these areas exist. And if, and then maybe even having a second-hand look at localizing, are there areas that are having those designations that really shouldn't, in our opinion, that could be exempted, rather than, being overly prescriptive, by just basing it on that mapping and designations. But maybe either you or Karen can speak to that concern.
Through the mayor to yourself. So when currently, as we review applications for development, people come in with questions. The mapping is a screening tool. So you mentioned the provincially significant wetlands that are mapped by the province, and those change over time. So we always have, they're a first step screening tool. And from there, we then either go out or we have them go out to prove what's on the ground. So in the case, if you wanted to enlarge your backyard that was in a mapped area, we would have to verify that, yes, it is in fact, long before we got to a bylaw infraction. We'd still be in the discussion stage at that point to say, you cut down some trees. Where were they? How big were they? What were all the steps that led up to that point? And now what can we do about it if there is something to do about it? This process would never be a hard yes, no line where something happens and therefore here's your fine. I don't see the way that we approach discussions with landowners now. I don't see it rolling out that way. That's certainly not the intent.
Well, the other thing that kind of springs to mind, and I'm not endorsing the practice, but I know it does occur, is that a lot of the site prep stuff is done before those conversations might happen. And so obviously if there's the opportunity for it to be complaint based, you can go and try to do whatever investigation you can after the fact. But, I wonder about, the intention to preserve the canopy and especially in those areas. I think I understand that. I'm kind of torn about, how to effectively enforce it in a way that makes sense. Like, to me, it almost makes sense that if there's urban, canopy components, that it makes sense that would be a lot more preservation or maybe a focus for the sensitivity or the significant, canopy contributions from different trees in the village or built up areas than it would be on Mass Road. But again, I guess that doesn't really matter because you're restricting it to these environmentally sensitive areas exclusively, right? So, I mean, that's my only concern, is when I guess the answer to my own question is that you can go in and investigate after the fact, because I've had complaints about clear cutting and site prep that, has been going on. And then it becomes all of a sudden, oh, look, it was just clear this whole time and now I can just get my permit and move on. So is there anything I'm missing about, in that sort of answering my own question kind of thing?
Through the mayor to yourself, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about site prep ahead of approvals. That's the one big thing that other jurisdictions are really trying to get a handle on, are cutting down the large swaths of treed areas. It's not going after the 6 trees in someone's backyard. That's not the intent. That's why there's special fines for clear cutting, why it needs special approval. And right now, we haven't seen a lot of that going on in the township, but what we do have, another issue we have is we will have approvals. We will go through the process during a planning approval, and then we will have no ability to ensure that those replantings do occur. We have no mechanism to enforce that after the fact. So it's sort of a paper exercise in some ways. So that becomes a frustration to see, you have these official plan policies in place, but we don't have a mechanism to enforce them. Does that answer your question?
No, I think that makes sense. Like you said, if there's, just because you have it without a penalty or a follow-up, reaction, then it's kind of fruitless. Okay, thanks for that. Sorry. Questions, other members of council, Councilor Byrne? Your Mayor?
Through you, Chair, you kind of brought up the subject that I was kind of dwelling on myself, is, how do you deal with site prep, ahead of time? And I'm still not quite sure we're accomplishing that here, but I mean, it's a step forward and, thank you for bringing this forward. I know it's been, almost a decade probably, and it's been on the docket for work. The other piece of it too is normal firewood. I mean, it almost seems like a get out of jail free card to me, because if you chop down a bunch of trees and you just say, call it firewood, you're clear. Right. And I don't know how you work with that one. Like, I understand the concept of, collecting firewood and whatnot, but it almost just seems like if I play that card, I'm within the jurisdiction of the thing, and I'm fine. So how does one define, normal firewood?
Through the chair to the deputy mayor, we do define normal firewood as, I believe it's up to 8 cords. And that amount is defined. Like you say, we wouldn't want to stop people from cutting down firewood or trees for firewood. So is 8 cords appropriate? Maybe that's something to as part of the information that we bring back. Is it too much? Is it too little? Is the expectation that Mr. Phillips and his staff go out there and be measuring? It's a challenging question to look at. Yes.
Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, I know we're just voting on accepting this report the same as the last. Hopefully I can have a little dialogue though. A big concern I have, this country was based on land ownership. The rights of property owners is fundamental, right? And when you start egressing on that, I have an issue. If somebody in the village wants to go buy 100 acres in the township and they want to plant 10,000 trees on it and they want to pay the mortgage, the insurance and the taxes to do that, I don't have an issue with that. But if the next person that buys that same 100 acres wants to cut down every tree on that 100 acres, rip up every stump and turn it back into farmland, I don't think we have any say in that either. If you're worried about anything, the bigger thing to me was we clear cut and scraped all the topsoil off the surrounding 50 acres of this building 7 or 8 years ago, I forget when, to build the hockey rink next door. That was the vanity project of the day, and we did that, but it sat just subsoil, wasn't even topsoil. And then later on, 3 or 4 years later, some vegetation starts to grow on that barren land to cut down the dust blowing across highway or County Road 10 here. And we scratched it all bare again to build a fire hall. The problem I have, we're talking saving the planet with tree canopy or whatever. I look at something like that staff endorsed at the time, and I see a real correlation that doesn't make sense to me. And when I look at this new policies, new government regulations, anything like that, it reminds me a lot of invasive species. When you start at some point in time, if you own the property, if you're paying the taxes, you're paying the bills, you should have some say over your property. And I don't like the encroachment of more regulations telling a property owner what they can and cannot do.
Yeah, so in that example you provided, Councillor, if you planted trees, it wouldn't be an identified environmentally sensitive area. You would have planted them. So it says it only applies to environmentally sensitive areas like we talked about. The map, that's what I was saying, the mapping exists at the provincial level already. So it's not that's the comment I made earlier, is that, so when you've designated one, there's no re-designations or new designations. These are historical. No, I'm telling you, I'm not asking. That's how it works. They're historically designated as provincially significant. And the mapping, I think the wetland one, I've got more experience with that, more experience of inaccuracy. I have no idea about the woodland mapping. And that's why I think a visual would be very helpful to understand. This will only apply to those. So when you buy a property and it has a provincially significant wetland on it, you are restricted because it's a provincially significant wetland. That has nothing to do with the municipality. it's been mapped as provincially significant, so you're restricted for your uses in building and encroachment and environmentally ways on that property. So it's not, like I said, it would be helpful, and I think in the next iteration, but also at the public meeting, it's very helpful to have the visuals to understand like where this is actually going to impose or affect how many, like, are we talking 10% of property owners that have an area? Because a lot of them are isolated, you know, at very backs of properties. You know, I grew up on a farm that we had, you know, a significant woodlot back there, cut a few trees for firewood here and there, but not that often. But so, you know, it's not like you're clear cutting that for development, and you're certainly would be restricted as developers are with regards to, you know, the components and clearing of those sites as well. So I think to your point, what makes sense to me the most about it is the fact that it allows you, we have that sort of reciprocal, we'll replant, you know, for the ones we identify on the site plan, yeah, we'll replant these ones. But if you can't enforce or, you know, if there's no stick to say, here is my proof that I have redone those things and that I committed to doing, it kind of never comes to fruition, right? So, but just to speak to the inaccuracies of that example, but I think that there is a point, like there is a line here that, you know, when they are provincially significant or deemed provincially significant, the township doesn't make that decision. We inherit that mapping and those implications. And that's what I'm struggling with. Is there an ability at the township level to sort of reconcile where we think those, you know, when I think of things like the Cabin Swamp and things like that, where are really significant areas that we all can, that there's a consensus that should be protected for various reasons, right? Is there an ability to create maybe a more prescriptive list to, you know, actually protect the things that we're trying to protect rather than create obstructions to the general enjoyment of properties for normal rural use?
Thank you, Mayor. To you and to your, excuse me, Councillor Byrne. So the provincially significant mapping, to start there, would be a conversation starter. It wouldn't be a yes, no, or, you know, we're issuing orders to do whatever. It becomes, hey, I want to do this thing. Sure. Let's go have a look to see if it actually is as the mapping suggests. It just gets them in the door to say, this is an area that has been mapped that we would like to see protected, but does it actually qualify? And that would be up to the people, the municipality. You mentioned having a forest lot in the back of an agricultural property. So through a forest management plan, we want to see, that's why it's called a forest management bylaw. We're looking to protect and enhance the existing woodlots that are in place in the township. Through forest management plans are a great tool that you can selectively cut and maintain the healthy, a healthy woodlot, which may not be for firewood. It may not be for, it may be, they may not all be dead and diseased, but it is identified as a forest management plan to say, here is how you keep your woodlot healthy. And Councillor Byrne, if you wish, as normal agricultural practices are on the exemption list, if you wish to create an arable field, that is on the exemption list. So that would not need a permit. We would just have that conversation and say, how much arable land do you need? That's what you're doing. And that would be the end of that conversation. So it's not about controlling how people use their land and anything. It's the furthest thing from that. It's about how do we maintain what we have and protect what we have moving forward, and giving us tools for when big players come in to clear cut large areas of land that we have identified for protection.
Yeah, I think the other complication with the, like you're talking about how many cords is too many cords. I think most people that I know with agricultural properties or larger properties with any woodlot significance, I mean, there's no shortage of firewood from the ice storm that's still down. So I just worry, like that would be my other thing, is that I'd hate to get into the what's the right amount of cords, especially if you have a winter like this one. Well, it's going to be more than what I thought. And as well, I just, as long as there's a nuances to as well, just that's why I'm hung me up with a bit of the cord, because I'm like, well, there could be hundreds, you know, you talk to the Staples Maple Syrup Farm. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of cords of wood that they'll take decades and lives to get rid of. That, you know, like you said, it doesn't apply to dead and or damage or everything, but it would be hard to necessarily tell, because I know, like, we've had certain incidences of complaints in certain woodlots and next to commercial properties where there's a belief that there's clear cutting going on down there. And when you look at the stumps that are left behind, it's hard to tell if it was dying, dead, or, you know, or had partially split or collapsed, like you can't recreate what it looked like before you cut it down. So those are the sorts of, I think it sounds as though there's a lot of room for nuance and exceptions. And as long as we have those opportunities, that I think if we can, I understand the end result is something that we all want and need and has merit. But I think we do have to be as sensitive as possible to appreciate the rural nuances and not be overly prescriptive. That's where I think the mapping to me is kind of very fundamental to understanding exactly the scale of what we're talking about. But I appreciate the comments in that regard as well. Great answers. Councillor Natchoff, and then I'll come to Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I was just looking at the date, and Earth Day falls on April 22nd of this year. So maybe this might be an opportunity for us to kind of tie in as a educational, we're gonna try to bring, or, as we move this forward, that this might be an opportunity to engage with the public, to kind of maybe an opportunity for feedback or a teaching. I know we have our kind of tree program and planting that we do as well. So maybe this might be just something to add to the programming around that period of time. Thanks.
Yeah, and before I go to Councillor Byrne, just another thing that I mentioned to staff earlier, but just so we formalize it, is I think, this also would be a bylaw that would be, I think, pertinent for maybe a discussion or a review at the Sustainability Committee. Like this falls under their purview, and, their marketing, they have a slight budget for some of the marketing and initiatives that they're doing, but it could also be an entity with the public and members of council that they could work together to help potentially communicate or understand the nuances, because, we're always looking for more voices to carry the chorus of the things that we're trying to do and the merits behind them, and, sort of countering a lot of the disinformation that's out there. So I think it might make sense for them to even just take a look at it or provide some feedback for council if it's coming back to a future report. We've got lots of time, and like you said, it's been lots of time. Some of these trees are a lot bigger than they used to be when we started working on this report. But, I think it's something that might make sense for that, at least that committee to sort of provide a comment on for that next, whenever it comes back to council. Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, to the point the mayor made about mapping and stuff, there's lots of people who live in this township, own their own property for well over 80 years or more. And then government regulations have all of a sudden crept across their properties and created new sensitive zones or wetlands, and it keeps expanding and expanding, and it's doing it for all the right reason, but it impacts people. And I just worry that sometimes when we start in these inroads and it sounds so nice, the outcomes are not always the same.
Okay, good discussion. Ms. Hurley?
Thank you, Chair, to Council. Just to clarity, maybe one of the suggestions might be, Matt, if you can possibly have your laptop there and you can actually, for the PIC, pull up your properties. People like to really view their property. It's great to have all that background information, and but for education purposes, when you look at someone's property, you can maybe have that interactive conversation about their individual properties. The other point to that is, I just wanted to clarify, we didn't clear cut for the fire station or the community center. It was not sensitive land. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we didn't go in there and take down all those trees and everything. So it was not sensitive lands at the time. Thank you. Or nor is it now.
Thank you. Oh, and just on that same point, Matt, sorry, I think for visibility purposes, I know we have this TV on a cart kind of thing, but I think for people to actually be able to interact with the map, it might be helpful to have your laptop synced up to the TV so they can see it. We can go through in different parts of the township and see where these mapping areas lie, rather than just being confined to a tiny screen. I think we have TVs here. I'm not saying pull down the whole screen, because that has its drawbacks too, but if you're able to, sync up to the TV or cast to the TV so that you can sort of walk people through if they want to see their property or they want to just get an understanding of where the mapping is, I think that would be helpful too. Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair, probably my fault. Maybe I wasn't clear when I referred to the acreage around here. They clear cut. I don't know if I used that term, but they scraped out all the topsoil was the issue I was making. So the comparison between trying to save the planet, greenery and whatever, best practice as far as I know was not to scratch all the topsoil off a piece of land that was going to be used for something else more than 6 months ahead, possibly a year. I don't even know if there's firm rules, but I was referring to the topsoil, not clear cutting trees.
Noted. All right, Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Chair. I'm glad we're having this conversation, Matt. It's, been a long time coming, as I said before, and it'll be interesting to see the feedback we get from the public. So I'm happy to move this and receive this.
Seconded by Councillor Natshaw. All in favor? That is approved. Good discussion, everybody. Thanks for that. And thanks, Matt, for all the information. Next, we have Chris Allison, Parks and Facilities, Single Sourcing Procurement for the CMC Park Detailed Design, Construction Administration, and the Millbrook Downtown Park Phase 1 Detailed Design and Construction. Chris.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I have before you Parks and Facilities Report 2026-01. The recommendations are that Council approve the single source procurement for the Cabin Monaghan Community Center Park Detailed Design and Construction Administration and the Millbrook Downtown Park Phase 1 Detailed Design and Construction Administration, and that Council approve the single source procurement of Landscape Planning Limited at a total cost of $148,172.74, which is $145,610 plus net municipal HST for the Community Center Park Detailed Design and Construction Administration, and $152,248.22, which is $149,615 plus net municipal HST for the Millbrook Downtown Park Phase 1 Detailed Design and Construction Administration. Single Source and Landscape Planning Limited is recommended to ensure continuity, efficiency, and timely project delivery. Landscape Planning Limited was the township's original consultant for the concept designs presented to council, master planning, community and stakeholder consultation, and background research for both the Cabin Monaghan Community Center lands and the Millbrook Downtown Park. Retaining the same firm allows the township to build directly on this work, minimizing duplication, reducing risk, and maintaining consistency. Their established understanding of the site conditions, constraints, and community priorities enables the detailed design and construction administration to proceed efficiently. Staff are satisfied that the single source procurement, in accordance with the purchasing policy, represents best value for the township.
Thanks for that, Chris. So just a couple questions to start, and then I'll turn to council. So first of all, these amounts are already approved in the budget that was just approved, so we have security in that regard. But I guess, from a single source and justification, I think, well, I know like they're two very different projects, because obviously with on the downtown parklands, there's a lot of environmental sensitivity. You have M&R lands right there. And there's, a small creek running through the middle of that site. So there's a lot of environmental sensitivity, and we are up against a deadline of 2027 to get moving on the grant specific parts of that document. So I can understand that justification for the downtown park for sure. It makes a lot of sense. Are we seeing a benefit of, I know the landscape planning was also the consultant on the CMCC lands as well, but I don't see as much of a justification there. But maybe you can speak to it with regards to, more nuances that I might not be aware of with regards to doing that, or are we seeing a cost benefit from doing both with the same consultant?
Through you, Mayor, to council, this, with the CMC remaining lands, we do have the Hydro One grant, which was $100,000 for the beach volleyball. Part of that grant proposal, Hydro One did want to see this be installed as soon as possible so they could see where their money's going to. It's going to something quick, and with the quicker design phase, we do align ourselves as shovel ready too, so we can apply for future grants that come up quicker.
Okay, I didn't think about the shovel readiness for some of the grant requirements. That's a good point. Questions, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, for my clarity, in this process, I understand the continuity thing if we stick with one person that's been involved with some of the prior stuff. But we have experienced things where we hired the same third person 3 times to do something, hoping it would work out, and it didn't. What my question is there a problem with the process? If you put this out to open tender, could the waiting of whoever comes in with offers to do the job, we can still keep the continuity? We're not bound to take the lowest bid. We're still able to take this individual. I'm just worried about single sourcing. That leads to issues. I'm just wondering is there the flexibility to put this out to general, receive all the best guesses of what it's going to cost, and still be able to keep the continuity that you would like, but it would give, use, because I'm not allowed to be in that process anymore, an idea of, are we being treated fairly?
So I think before Chris speaks, so with regards to the continuity, there's no other provider that would have the continuity. Because this person has, what that's the comment, is that they've been a part of the design, the compliments, they're the only company that's been on the ground, understands all the environmental, and also have, especially when the downtown park is concerned, they are the only agency that has already established and got approvals from the commenting agencies that we would have to deal with on that site. All of those conversations would have to start anew, and we would also be delayed by however many months it would take to get the tender out to tender and then have the 30, 60-day window for applications. I think we could do it as short as 30, but it would take 2 more months out of the building cycle and get us closer to that deadline. So I'm more concerned, that's why I phrased my initial comments, I'm more concerned about the downtown park. I really don't have any issues with single sourcing. But to Chris's point, we'd like to do more there, but to do so, we understand we need, because of the fiscal limitations that we talked about at great length today. We're hoping that there's grant opportunities for building out some of that amenities as well. So can you maybe speak to additional components of that? But just to be clear, there's the only one that you're also bound by your procurement process. So you can't re-engineer a procurement process with nuances to benefit one potential proponent. Like you have a process by which you would have, and that I think you get in a lot of legal issues if you said, well, even though we're $100,000 less or more, we're getting treated fairly because of these individuals already done this work. Maybe Yvette can speak to that, or Chris, and whomever, I'm open.
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, you're totally right, Mayor. And we do not want to go back to ground zero and start right from the beginning again. Landscape planning they did all the community engagement, all the stakeholder engagement. They have all the background information. They have met with Orca. They've met with Hiawatha. And if we do have the plan in place, like I said, we are shovel ready to apply for grants as they come up as soon as possible.
Okay, other questions, members of council? Seeing none. Okay, so there are 2 recommendations, or the first recommendation is that council approve single source procurement for the Cabot Montague Community Center Park detailed design and construction administration, and the Millbrook Downtown Park Phase 1 detailed design and construction administration, and that council approve the single source procurement of landscape planning limited to a total cost of $148,172.74. I'm not going to read the extra municipal HST thing. For the community center park detailed design and construction administration, and at $152,248.22 for the Millbrook Downtown Park Phase 1 detailed design and construction administration. Just before we go to moving and seconder for that motion, just to confirm, this is also just the groundworks, right? The site preparation, we talked about that. That's what makes it DC eligible. So that is all the works that we're talking about tendering for this stuff. It's not a commitment to sustain the entire build out of a future park for 10 years. It's just this site prep. Okay, thanks, Chris. Mover and seconder for those 2 recommendations. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. All right, moving on. We have a number. Oh, we've already done that one. So council and committee, any verbal reports? I know most of the committees are closed for the day. Councilor Byrne, verbal report from a committee.
Through the chair, just more of a comment. I just want to thank the roads crews for cleaning up the main street of Millbrook to make it accessible to get into the businesses down there. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Wayne. You guys have been doing a great job, and make sure you pass that on. It's been a hell of a winter, and that light snow isn't just because it's easier to shovel doesn't mean it's easier to move en masse. So you guys are doing a great job. So thanks for that. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, just to follow up on that one, I guess the groundhog did see a shadow today, so you only got about 6 more weeks of this to deal with. On top of that, we did have a sustainability committee meeting. Was that last week? Yeah, I'm starting to lose track of time. And yeah, making good progress on that one, and perhaps begun for another Earth Day event. So keep your ears open for that one. It was a huge success last year. Capitalize on that yet again. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. And just myself, we had Deputy Mayor, myself, and Ms. Hurley attended the Roma conference. It was a very good conference again this year. A few different changes, but a lot of the same themes. And as we talked about in one of the previous budget meetings, we're hopeful and optimistic that Rome is, one of the things that they're doing is trying to promote careers in municipal government because, there's a real backlog or really lack of opportunities or at least a lack of awareness of the opportunities that municipal government can provide. As we've tried with different recruitment efforts, there's definitely a lack of individuals that are aware of the opportunities in that space to make a real significant difference in their community. So we're grateful for that advocacy. Overall, good conference. Can I get a mover and a seconder for those verbal reports? Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Councilor Edgerton. All in favor? That is approved. There is no general business, no correspondence for information. Correspondence for action. I have one. I've been speaking with the Millbrook Agricultural Society with regards to this year being the 175th annual Millbrook Fair. So congratulations there's a lot of planning in the works and we're really excited. I forgot to mention, but I'll come back to that again, Miss Hurley. But first of all, we're going to convene we're waiting to schedule a meeting with myself and the members of the Fair Board to talk about how the municipality can work and support, special celebrations. Their first initial ask was what's before us today. There's a request. They're trying to coordinate the Canadian Armed Forces aircraft doing a flyover during the fair. We don't know which date yet. And obviously there's a lot going on with the armed forces. So whenever they're available, we put in all the days that the fair is underway. So hoping that we'll get one. So that's the reason behind that. So we're happy to provide, they require this letter in order to move forward with their requests. So I'd looked for council for a mover and a seconder for the following motion that council for the Township of Kappamonigan are supportive of a flyby by the Canadian Armed Forces aircraft as low as 500 feet for the planned 175th annual Millbrook Fair being held at 13 Frederick Street, Millbrook, Ontario for transit practice and shows on June 11th to 14th, 2026. Moved by Councilor Natchoff, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Sure, Councilor Byrne, why not?
Through the chair, just because we're sharing humorous stuff, I hope this goes a lot better than anybody that followed Corner Gas for the episode that happened.
There you go. Bylaws, that bylaw number 2026-03 being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute a documentation to delete an old agreement from the title to municipal lands, and bylaw number 2026-04 being a bylaw to authorize the sale of the lands described as part of lot 12 concession 7 being part 1 of PIN 28008-0071 plan 45R-11976 in the geographic township of Cavan, now in the township of Kappamonigan. We read it first, second, third time and passed this second day of February, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. There is no unfinished business. There are no notices of motion. The confirming bylaw, that bylaw number 2026-05 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held February 2nd, 2026, be read a first, second, third time and passed this second day of February, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Going to get a mover for the confirming bylaw. Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. And I hope I'm not overstepping, but I believe it is Councilor Natchoff's birthday today. So happy birthday, Councilor Natchoff. The secret is out. And with that, we'll look to council for a motion to adjourn today's meeting. Let's get the birthday boy, Councilor Natchoff, on that. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. We have a number of upcoming events in the township. The next regular council meeting is Tuesday, February 17th. It's on the Tuesday because of the Family Day holiday on the Monday. Just of note, the Kappamonigan Public Library Board meeting is the next meeting on Tuesday, February 17th at 7 p.m. The Millbrook Valley Trails Advisory Committee meeting is Monday, February 23rd at 4 p.m. And the subsequent regular council meeting is March 2nd at 1 p.m. in the chambers. Thank you. We will see you in the township. Take care.